You're cooking eggs in the morning. I get this sometimes and my egg breaks and I love over these eggs. And I get so angry when it breaks because I have this idea of what I want for breakfast. Yet it's teaching me there's other goods out there.
Evil and suffering are probably the greatest obstacles, I think, to most people to believe that there's a God. I know this is something that Lewis struggled with while he was still an atheist.
It's really hard to reconcile this idea that there's a good God, and yet there's so much suffering and evil in the world. And even more so, it becomes really difficult when it becomes personal and close to home. You have a loved one that's dying, you're praying, and you're asking yourself, how can a good God allow this to happen?
It ceases to be theoretical.
It ceases to be theoretical. And unfortunately, we won't be able to get to that personal and emotional level. Ours will stay more theoretical and theological. But when you think about this, I believe when we're addressing this issue and talking about it, you have to actually address evil and suffering separately, even though they're very related. And even when you're answering the problem of evil and suffering, you should really start with the question of why did God create us? And God created us to know Him, to love Him, and to share and participate in His beauty, His goodness, and the creation that we get to enjoy. And to do that, free will is utterly necessary.
Yeah, unless I can't genuinely love someone unless I have the option of not loving them.
You have to have free will for love.
And I think that points us to a truth about evil. Evil isn't a thing.
Yeah.
Evil is a privation, a twisting. It's a seeking of something good, but in the wrong way, or at the wrong time, or to the wrong degree. It's a distortion.
And that's important because people reconcile, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but how could a good God create evil? Well, evil was not created. Mm-hmm. Good things were created, free will was created, and then free will can use a good in a way that it becomes an evil. And just think of it, not quite to the extreme, but just think of food or drink. Food is awesome. Drink's not bad either. But if your will takes it to an extreme and you just overeat obsessively, you become a glutton. And that's a bad. And drink isn't bad.
No.
It's delicious. But if you go to an extreme, drunkenness can become a bad.
Absolutely. And I think actually the whole question of evil and suffering, it's only really a problem for those who believe in God if atheists can prove that God cannot bring any good out of it. Because that's typically been the historic Christian response, that God allows evil so that an even greater good can be brought out of it. I've heard this story of a farmer. He had some horses, and one day somebody left the fence gate open, and the horses bolted.
Oh, I'd be devastated.
Well, all of his neighbors said, "Oh, what a tragedy." And he said, "We'll see." And then the next day, the horses return, which is great, but they brought back with them some wild horses. So he got some free horses.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Lucky that won the lottery.
Yeah, so all of his neighbors said, "What a wonderful thing." And he said, "We'll see." And then the next day, his son is trying to break in one of these wild horses, and the horse bucks him, and he lands awkwardly and breaks his leg. And once again, all of the neighbors say, "What a terrible thing." And he says, once more, "We'll see." He wasn't very excitable. He was probably English. But he said, "We'll see." And then the next day, the army come through the village, and they conscript all of the young men to go and fight in a war. But they can't now take his son because he has a broken leg. Mm. And I think all of this just goes to show that we don't have a very good perspective. We're not at a good vantage point to be able to see the good that can come out of things that, on the face of it, seem terrible.
That story's spot on. I like that. And it's the same thing with suffering. So we've separated evil and suffering. Suffering we struggle with in the moment, and we don't see the good that can come out of it. But suffering is one of the most amazing tools for shaping us. It can for bad. Of course, suffering can cause someone to become very bad, but it can also be an incredible tool for good. And we know this in the secular perspective. We struggle it from the faith perspective. We know it in the secular perspective. No pain, no gain. I think of an article that I had read recently that was talking about looking at the lives, the childhood lives of the billionaires. And it asked the question, did they have it easier? Did they have some sort of leg up or an advantage? And what was interesting, and they found in the majority of the cases, they had a much harder upbringing than the average person did. But that suffering created this strength and this ability to become a person that could accomplish greatness. It's no different in the spiritual world.
And we see this in the saints, those who live lives of courageous virtue. Great adversity led to great sanctity.
This makes me think of a brilliant TED Talk by Brené Brown, one of the most famous actually in terms of views, called The Power of Vulnerability. So often we want to mute one emotion while having the other. So she talks about it in the sense of joy, happiness, and we want to mute pain, suffering, i.e. the things that come with vulnerability. Guess what? You don't get to mute one and still get the other. And it's the same thing. You can't try to mute suffering and still expect to be courageous, virtuous, have fortitude. Those come from the struggle.
And in fact, if you think about it, if we didn't have a universe where there was a possibility of danger, then there's no possibility of courage either.
Yeah.
Or if we can't suffer, well, then we can't develop the virtue of fortitude. So when people talk about wanting a universe where there's less suffering, how much would you get rid of?
That's a question you always have to ask.
Yeah, are stubbed toes still allowed? Because I think naturally...
They don't seem necessary.
Well, see, human beings, we always want less suffering than we currently have.
And the stub toes are necessary. For me, it's you're cooking eggs in the morning. I get this sometimes and my egg breaks and I love over these eggs. And I get so angry when it breaks because I have this idea of what I want for breakfast. Yet it's teaching me there's other goods out there. Patience, the virtues. So even then, that little bit of suffering is helpful.
I don't think we can really talk about evil and suffering without pointing out that the central proclamation of Christianity is that God can take something that looks like a failure, that looks like the worst possible thing, the most evil thing, the most pointless thing, and transform it into the greatest good, into a victory, into something truly wonderful. And I'm obviously talking about the crucifixion here.
That's so good. It's a perfect example.
Because you have Jesus, the sinless Son of God, who comes and teaches and heals, and yet for his troubles is beaten and tortured and executed. If ever there was a failure, this looks like a failure. Yet this is exactly what Christians say puts us right with God. That the cross isn't the end. That you might have Good Friday, but you also have Easter Sunday. Where there's death, there also comes life. And through this, we're made right with God once again.
Yeah, free will is necessary to love. But of course, that opens a door for evil. And the same thing, suffering is an incredible tool for shaping us. And I love how you said, there's Good Friday, but there's Easter Sunday. The next time we're struggling with suffering, ask ourselves, God, how can we grow in this? How can we grow closer to you? How can we grow stronger in love, courage, and the virtues, and make so much good come out of this?
And how can we be more like Jesus? And can we come to God with a confidence, knowing that even the terrible things that I'm currently going through, he can transform them just like he did the crucifixion.
I love that.
Cheers.
Cheers. We want to thank you for watching this. David and I are incredibly passionate about the Christian faith. In our journey, we found there to be such truth and beauty in it. And if there's anything you disagree with, if there's anything you're struggling with that we just haven't talked about, we invite you to share that in the comments, and we would love the opportunity to address that, to do a video on it. Because if you're struggling with it, probably others are.
And if you are an excellent sort of person who wants to go to heaven, please share this link.
It's that simple. We offer you heaven for very cheap.
But seriously, if you found one of our videos helpful, if it has helped you grow in your love and understanding of Christianity or C.S. Lewis, please share it with your friends. See you next time.
Further up.
Further in.
Cheers.